In the far reaches of forgotten Asia, where mountains cradle villages time has tried to bury, where rice paper windows shiver not from wind, but from whispers, there are stories that were never meant to be told. You've entered FolkFear, a place where ancient rituals still echo in the bones of the earth, and ancestral sins fester beneath red candles and temple dust. Here we do not chase horror. It comes to us, quietly, through incense smoke, through rotting paper charms, through bloodlines that remember what you try to forget. Tonight, we follow the scent of betrayal, to a mountain village veiled in mist, where the dead are honored with offerings, but never all of them. There is a ritual, there are rules, and there is one incense stick that must never burn. But when the 13th is lit, the past claws its way out of the ashes. A bride cursed her bloodline without knowing. A family begins to die one by one, marked by a scent that never fades. And now, someone has returned. The altar is waiting. The 13th incense is burning. Welcome to the 13th Incense Stick. Let the ritual begin. The road to the village was nothing more than a thin, crumbling ribbon of stone, winding its way through the mist-covered mountains like a vein leading into the heart of something ancient and forgotten. May hadn't been here since she was a child, since the days when her grandmother's voice still echoed through the halls of the ancestral house like a lullaby soaked in incense smoke and sorrow. Now she returned alone. The bus had dropped her off hours ago. Since then, the mountain had swallowed her. Fog hugged the ground like breath from the dead. Every step she took felt like trespass. In her backpack, tucked carefully between clothes that still smelled of the city, was a faded red envelope. Inside it, the death notice. Her grandmother, Madame Yao, was gone. The woman who raised her after her parents' accident, the last matriarch of the Yao bloodline. And with her passing, May had inherited everything, including the house and the altar. By the time May reached the village gates, the sun was nothing more than a pale ghost behind the clouds. The wooden archway loomed, its calligraphy eroded by years of rain and neglect. She paused there, fingers brushing the carved symbols of protection, symbols no one had repainted in decades. She stepped through. The village had aged into stillness, the houses hunched close together like old men in mourning, their tiled roofs sagging under the weight of silence. Red banners hung limp beside empty doors, faded to a rust color that looked too much like dried blood. Chickens wandered the roads, unbothered. There were no children, no voices, just wind. And a smell, faint but sharp, burnt sandalwood and old ash. Incense. May's fingers tensed around the strap of her bag. The Yao house stood at the far edge of the village, just before the forest line began to climb the mountain's throat. It was larger than the others, but colder somehow. The walls were still strong, but the wood groaned as she opened the gate. A crow flapped away from the roof with a rasping caw, feathers drifting like ash into the overgrown garden. Inside, the silence was complete. Until it wasn't. A single knock, soft, hollow, echoed from deep within the house. May froze. Another knock, then silence again. She told herself it was wood settling, just old beams and wind. But her feet didn't move for several long minutes. Eventually, she stepped inside. The floorboards creaked like whispered warnings. Cobwebs crowned the corners of the ceiling. Her grandmother's slippers still sat by the door, as if she'd just stepped out into the garden. And then she smelled it again, stronger this time. Incense, but not the kind sold in temple markets. This was older, bitter, sharp with something metallic beneath the smoke. She followed it, past the kitchen, down the narrow hallway that always felt too long. The walls here were lined with old photographs, faces of the Yao family, sepia-toned and solemn. None of them smiled. Most wore ceremonial robes. Her eyes lingered on one of them, a young bride in traditional red, her face serene but her eyes hollow. She didn't remember this photo. Finally, May reached the altar room. The door was sealed. Thick red wax had been dripped across the wood in streaks, forming crude runes in an old dialect she barely recognized. Something primal in her recoiled. Not fear exactly, instinct. Something that said, "Leave it sealed." But her hand reached out anyway. The wax cracked as she peeled it from the frame. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick, warm, almost wet like breath that had been waiting for her return. The altar stood as it always had, carved of black wood, its edges worn smooth by generations of hands. The 12 incense bowls sat in a perfect arc, each one named for a generation. Her grandmother had explained it once when May was too young to understand. One stick for each ancestor, 12 generations deep, 12 honored spirits. But something was wrong. The room should have been cold, empty. Instead, a single incense stick was burning, tall, blackened at the tip, the ember glowing red in the half-light. 13 bowls. 13. And the last one, the one at the very end, wasn't labeled like the others. Its wood was darker, almost charred. The smoke from it curled unnaturally, as if it moved against gravity. It danced toward her like a beckoning finger. May stepped back. Her heart was pounding now, but her feet remained frozen. She stared at that stick for a long time, until the ember seemed to pulse in time with her breath. She remembered something, faint and buried. Her grandmother's voice shaking for once. Never let the 13th burn. If it burns, something comes to collect. That had sounded like a story then, a bedtime ghost tale told to keep children obedient. But this was not a story. This was real, and the 13th incense stick was already burning. The smoke lingered in May's lungs, long after she fled the altar room. She had shut the door, gently, carefully, as if Moise might awaken whatever that ember had summoned, and sealed it again with trembling hands. The wax was gone, melted into useless puddles on the floor. She used masking tape from her bag instead, crisscrossing the frame like a feeble talisman. But deep inside, she knew it wouldn't matter. The 13th incense was burning. It had already begun. That night, sleep didn't come. She sat curled on the dusty mattress of her grandmother's bedroom, the smell of mothballs and old camphor clinging to the sheets. Her fingers traced the edge of the red envelope again, now wrinkled and torn. In the low glow of her phone, she opened the death notice once more, searching for something she'd missed, some strange phrasing, some coded warning. There was nothing. Just the date, the time of death, and one peculiar instruction. The altar must not be disturbed. Do not relight. Relight, she whispered aloud. It hadn't gone out. It was already burning. But how? The house had been locked, the room sealed. No one else lived here anymore, not since her grandmother had stopped accepting visitors, not since the last funeral. May hadn't thought much of it then, but now it felt like isolation had been a protective measure, not a choice. She didn't know what terrified her more, that someone else might have lit the 13th stick, or that it had lit itself. At dawn, the fog remained thick, as if reluctant to leave. May wandered into the village square, seeking answers or at least company, but few faces emerged. Old men with tobacco-stained teeth nodded at her without speaking. A woman selling dried herbs looked through her as if she were already a ghost, and the children, if there were any, stayed hidden. The village felt emptied of life, or waiting for something worse. Only one person acknowledged her fully. A hunched figure in priest's robes sat beneath the plum tree near the well. His head was shaved clean, his skin darkened by years of sun and incense smoke. His eyes, though old, were piercing, the kind that saw past skin and into memory. "You are the granddaughter of Yao Lian," he said before she spoke. "I am." "You shouldn't have come back." "The house. Something's wrong." The monk nodded slowly, motioning for her to sit. The earth beneath the tree was cool. Wind stirred its brittle leaves. "What do you know of the 13?" he asked softly. She swallowed. 12 ancestors, 12 incense sticks, one for each generation. My grandmother taught me that. She told me never to light the 13th. Because it is not for the honored, it is for the forsaken. May frowned. "I don't understand." The monk leaned forward, voice low. "Long ago, your family made a pact. During the famine of the bitter years, when children starved and elders died in silence, the Yao bloodline turned to old ways, ways even the Taoists feared." He picked up a twig and drew a circle in the dirt, then 12 dots within it. 12 honored dead, protected, remembered. Then he pressed the twig hard outside the circle, making a 13th mark. But one was cast out, a brother or a sister. No one remembers now, only that they were used as a vessel, a blood sacrifice to the spirits that answer when no gods will. "A sacrifice?" May's voice cracked. "Yes," he said, "to preserve the family. The crops returned, the children lived, but the price was never fully paid." He looked up at her. "So each generation burns 12, and never the 13th, because to light that one is to open the debt again, to let the forsaken one in." May's skin crawled. "I didn't light it. I found it already burning." The monk's face darkened. "Then someone has welcomed the spirit back, or the spirit has grown strong enough to return on its own." Back at the house, the atmosphere felt heavier. The hallway to the altar room seemed longer than before. The photos on the wall no longer looked still. She couldn't explain it, but the bride in red now had her eyes open, or perhaps they always were, but now they watched her. That afternoon, May found her grandmother's journals. They were hidden in a wooden chest beneath the tea table, bound with red ribbon. The pages were brittle, the ink faded in places, but her grandmother's careful handwriting remained. One entry stood out, dated nearly 30 years ago. "Lien returned in red. The ritual failed. Her husband vanished that night. We warned her not to include the 13th in the bridal offering, but she said it was beautiful, that it matched her dress. She thought it would bring good fortune. It brought the curse back. I have sealed the room. The monks say the spirit is trapped so long as the incense is never lit again, but I hear footsteps at night. The scent never leaves the air. It is waiting for someone else to make the same mistake." That night, May heard footsteps too. Not loud, not near, just constant, soft, padded steps across the wooden floors, the kind her grandmother used to make in slippers. Except no one was there. When she opened her eyes in the middle of the night, the hallway was full of shadows, figures kneeling, their backs bowed, faces to the floor, as if in prayer. And in her room, on the windowsill, lay a small bundle of incense sticks bound with black twine, 12 new ones, and one single 13th, unmarked, waiting. The next morning, the bundle of incense was gone. May searched the house in silence, careful not to speak aloud. She checked the windowsill again, then under the bed, the hallway, the altar room, still sealed with layers of tape, now puckered and yellowing at the edges. Nothing. No ash, no scent, no twine, as if it had never been there. But she remembered it, every detail, the 13 sticks wrapped in black cord, one slightly darker than the rest, as if already used. And she remembered the shadowed figures, the way they bowed before her bed in wordless devotion or warning. She hadn't dreamed it. The scent of incense still lingered in her clothes. Later that afternoon, she found herself walking to the far end of the village, past the bamboo groves, beyond the overgrown rice fields, until she reached the edge of the cliff path. From there, the valley opened wide, a distant sea of mist and treetops. And in the center, tucked into a pocket of forest, was the old ceremonial house. The villagers called it Shifang, the fragrant room. It had once hosted weddings, ancestral offerings, and festivals before everything fell silent. It had been locked for years, ever since the Red Wedding, Leon's wedding, May's aunt. She had died childless, her memory buried in whispers. But May remembered the story, not from her grandmother, who never spoke of it, but from the village children, their games, their rhymes. One stood out, chanted in high voices on moonless nights. Red veil, red room, 13th flame seals the groom. Kiss the bride and lose your breath. Love is ash, and ash is death. She hadn't understood it then. Now it made her skin crawl. The ceremonial house groaned as she entered. The front doors hung crooked on their hinges. Inside, dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed for years. Spiderwebs glistened in the filtered sunlight that poured through a hole in the ceiling. Patches of red silk hung like dried blood from the beams. But the wedding room itself had been preserved. It was wrong. The dust stopped at the threshold, clean inside, as though someone had swept, or recently. The room was set as if waiting. 2 cushions before an altar, an empty tea set, a red bridal veil folded neatly on the table. And beside it, half hidden under a yellowed handkerchief, was a single burnt incense stick, broken in 2. May didn't touch it. She just stared. The air felt thick, humid, as if the room had just exhaled. In the corner stood a lacquered wardrobe, red and gold, the symbol for double happiness carved across its doors, the traditional bridal chamber cabinet. She opened it. Inside, hung untouched for decades, was a red qipao wedding dress, dustless, preserved. Its fabric shimmered in the dim light, still fragrant with something floral and faintly charred. Her breath caught. Tucked into the collar was a photograph. She pulled it free. It showed Leon and her groom, both young, both smiling. Leon wore the red dress. The groom's face was slightly blurred, as though the ink had been smeared. But behind them, unmistakable, was the family altar, and at its center, a 13th incense stick burning. May took the photo to the monk. He examined it in silence, then slowly set it down beside his prayer beads. She lit it, he said, not knowing what it meant. It was a wedding, May whispered. She thought it was just ceremonial, a blessing. The monk nodded, but it was not her blessing to give. The 13th does not bless, it binds. He leaned back, his voice low. When the spirit was sacrificed all those generations ago, it was promised something, not heaven, not rest, a return. Return to what? To the bloodline. He gestured at the photo. When your aunt lit the 13th incense on her wedding day, the spirit saw its opening. Through joy, through ritual, through the most sacred threshold between two lives. A marriage, yes, the binding of souls. But it took the wrong one. Her husband? No body was ever found, only his shoes at the doorstep. And Leon, she began to wither, piece by piece, as though something was eating her from inside. May's hands clenched in her lap. My grandmother never told me. She tried to protect you, he said gently. But curses don't fade with silence, they deepen. Back at the house, the light had shifted. Dusk bled in through the windows, casting long red shadows across the walls. The hallway felt colder. The photographs looked older. One frame had fallen. She picked it up. It was Leon again, standing beside her younger self, maybe 8 years old. Her aunt had placed a hand on her shoulder. Both were smiling. But behind them, barely visible, something moved in the background. A shape, almost human, almost not, half visible, half formed, near the altar room. That night, May lit a single candle and opened her grandmother's journals again. She flipped past the early entries, past stories of harvests, births, names crossed out with care, until she found a torn page, glued hastily back in. The handwriting different, sharper, as if written in urgency. Leon refused to leave. She said she could feel him calling her back. Every time she slept, he appeared not as he was, but hollow. His voice came from behind her eyes. She tried to destroy the dress, but it wouldn't burn. She tried to smash the altar bowl. It split her hand open instead. She stopped eating. She said she could only taste ash, and that her skin felt like smoke. The 13th stick still burned. It never went out. Sometime after midnight, May woke to the sound of paper tearing. Not loud, just slow, like someone peeling old wallpaper. She stepped into the hallway. The altar room door stood open. The tape was torn down, and from inside, a faint glow. Smoke curled toward her, thicker now, stronger. It smelled not only of incense, but of scorched silk, burnt sugar, flesh. She stepped forward. Inside, the 13th incense stick stood upright in its blackened bowl, ember pulsing red like a dying eye. But that wasn't what made her scream. It was the veil, the red bridal veil, folded neatly on the altar, still warm.
May didn't remember moving. She only knew that she was outside the altar room, on her knees, her breath coming in gasps, her palms pressed hard to the cold wooden floor. The veil was still there. She had seen it, blood red, neatly folded, resting on the altar like an offering. But it wasn't just the fabric, it was the scent. Fresh, recently worn, the unmistakable perfume of old jasmine and sweat, the kind brides wore on wedding nights, the kind that faded if the bride returned. But this one hadn't, and someone or something had placed it there. By morning, May's knuckles were scraped from gripping the floor. Her body ached as if she had been kneeling all night. She didn't remember falling asleep, only waking up to silence. Too much silence. The birds were gone. The wind had stopped. Even the ever-present hum of incense, gone. But the altar room door was still open, and the 13th incense was still burning. The ember hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown brighter. She locked the door this time, a real lock, not tape, then pushed an old cabinet in front of it for good measure. It wouldn't matter. She knew that. But it gave her a moment to breathe, to think. She needed answers, not just warnings, not just whispers. She needed a name. The village temple stood at the eastern edge, nestled between a pair of weather-worn cypress trees. Faded prayer flags hung like brittle skin across the gate. The stone lions at the entrance had lost their faces to erosion, but they still stood guard. Inside, the air was dry. The scent of old prayers, burnt paper, and wood polish clung to the beams. A single monk swept the floor in slow circles, unmoved by her entrance. She bowed, quietly. He looked up. "You seek the ancestral scrolls," he said, as if answering a question she hadn't spoken. "I do." The monk studied her face. "Yao blood?" May nodded. "Granddaughter of Yao Lian." The man's eyes darkened. He said nothing, only turned and led her to the back of the temple, to a sealed archive room with heavy bronze doors. From his sleeve he withdrew a ring of keys, each older than the last. The lock resisted, but finally gave way with a sound like bones cracking. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Scrolls lined the walls, some wrapped in silk, others brittle and curling at the edges. Each one recorded births, deaths, marriages, and the spiritual rites of every family in the village. The monk pointed to a lacquered chest in the corner. "The Yao lineage." She opened it carefully. Inside were 12 scrolls, each labeled by generation. Her grandmother's scroll was near the top, her neat signature in black ink, her seal in red. But beneath it, buried at the bottom, was something strange. A piece of parchment wrapped in twine, not silk, no name on the outside, just an inked symbol, smudged and angry. She untied it. What she saw inside made her stomach turn cold. The scroll was a bloodline chart, each branch carefully drawn, generation by generation, until one name, halfway down, was violently scratched out, not erased, removed. Thick black ink smeared the entire line. A red X had been slashed through the character, and beneath it, written in older calligraphy, Pan Xiang, the one who betrayed the incense. May stared at the name. Her breath fogged the paper. This was the ancestor who had been cut from the family, the 13th. There was no title, no birth date, no spouse, only a single line beneath the character. Cast out in the year of famine, the offering was made, the debt remains. She brought the scroll to the monk. His eyes widened. He did not touch it. "You should not speak that name aloud," he whispered. "Pan Xiang," she said anyway. Something shifted in the air. A gust of wind pushed through the temple, though the doors were shut. Candles flickered violently. The prayer bells above the altar rang once, and then stopped. The monk looked at her, grief and fear etched into his face. "She was a daughter," he said quietly, "the youngest, born under a hungry moon, in the year when the rains didn't come and the children died with swollen bellies." May's mouth was dry. "What happened?" "They made a choice." His voice was barely a whisper. Pan Xiang was offered in a secret rite, a binding. The elders called it the fire that feeds the blood. They believed that sacrificing one would preserve the many. They fed her spirit to the smoke and promised her body to the wind. "But they never gave her peace?" "No," the monk said. "They lit 12 sticks as always, but hers, the 13th, was buried, unlit, unhonored. And now? She wants to be remembered. She wants her place returned. She wants a body." May felt the weight of those words settle into her bones. "Mine?" she whispered. The monk said nothing. He didn't have to. Back at the house, the air felt heavier, like water. She unlocked the altar room, slow and trembling. The incense had burned halfway down, the ember still bright. But something was different. The wall behind the altar, plain wood for generations, was no longer blank. Someone had drawn across it. Dozens of red thumbprints pressed in messy circles, forming a shape. At the center, one name scrawled in ash: Pan Xiang. May backed away. A sharp pain bloomed in her chest. She ran to the bathroom, ripped open her shirt, and there, just below her collarbone, was a small, circular mark. A burn, as if someone had touched her in the night with the tip of a smoldering stick. That night, the dreams came. She was in the old wedding chamber, wearing red, hands bound in silk, kneeling before the altar, smoke thick in the air, and behind her, breath on her neck, cold, familiar. A voice, not a whisper, but an echo. "I gave them everything. Now you will give me form." She turned and saw a face that was nearly her own, but older and filled with rage.
May woke to the sound of dripping. Not water, not rain. Something heavier, slower, like wax falling onto stone. Her bedroom was cloaked in darkness, but the scent, thick and cloying, struck her first. Not just incense anymore. Something burned, something spoiled. The sour edge of old blood mixed with jasmine and soot. She reached for the lamp. It didn't turn on. When her eyes adjusted, she saw it. The hallway outside her door was glowing faint red, flickering like firelight, but without warmth. She stepped out barefoot. The walls were covered. Red wax, melted and smeared as if someone had written with it, or tried to. Symbols she didn't understand trailed along the wood, spirals and ancient scripts, some smeared by fingers. The trail led down the hallway to the altar room. Of course. The door stood wide open. She stood at the threshold and knew something had changed. The 12 incense bowls sat in their ark, each empty. But the 13th, it stood tall. The stick had burned nearly 3/4 down now, still glowing, still whispering smoke into the air. But now it dripped. Blood-red wax oozed from its base, not candle wax,
not incense resin, something darker. And it pooled into a copper bowl beneath it, one May had never placed there. The liquid hissed faintly when it touched the metal. A warning, a breath, a heartbeat. She stepped closer and froze. There was a mirror on the wall now, propped behind the altar, old and speckled, its frame blackened and cracked. In it, she saw herself. But not quite. Her reflection wore the veil. Her face was not her face. The eyes were deeper set, the skin paler, the expression older. And the mouth was smiling. May stumbled back, but the reflection remained still, unmoving, still smiling. She didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen, lights on, every bulb burning, as if brightness could drown out what the mirror had shown her. When dawn came, she went outside. The village was quieter than ever. Doors stayed closed, curtains didn't flutter. No one spoke to her. Only one person found her, the old woman from the herb stall. She shuffled toward May with hands stained by dried roots and prayer ash. "You lit it," the woman said softly. "It burns again." "I didn't," May whispered. "I found it burning." "Then it chose you." The woman reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small cloth pouch. For protection. Inside was a coin, ancient, square-holed, bound with red thread and pressed against dried wormwood. A talisman. "You are marked now. It can't be undone, but perhaps delayed." May's fingers closed around it. "Pan Xiang? Do you know who she was?" The woman's eyes clouded. A girl who should have been mourned. Instead, she was buried in silence. The family sealed her name in wax. But names are not forgotten, not if blood remembers. May thought of the thumbprints, the writing on the wall, the burn on her chest. She wants her name restored. "She wants more than that," the woman whispered. "A body." That night, May lit 12 incense sticks, not for ritual, for defiance. She placed them one by one in their designated bowls, just like her grandmother had taught her. She refused to look at the 13th. As each ember took flame, the room filled with smoke, thick, fragrant, hot, but not comforting. The air twisted, shadows moved. The mirror behind the altar began to fog. And then, clear, a scene emerged. Not a reflection, a memory. A girl in red kneeling before the altar, Lian, and beside her a man in ceremonial robes. May recognized him from a village photo. He had officiated many weddings long ago. In the vision, he held a 13th stick, hesitating, watching. Then he placed it down, next to the others. And the moment it touched the bowl, the mirror cracked. A shriek tore through the room. May stumbled back. Her incense sticks snapped in their bowls. The flames hissed. And the 13th? It blazed up in sudden, unnatural fire. Black. A fire that gave off no heat, only noise, screaming, chanting, the rush of 1,000 whispered prayers breaking into curses. The red wax beneath it began to bubble, then hiss, then move. It rose like a slow hand from the copper bowl, reaching, grasping. May ran, through the house, into the garden, past the old plume trees. She didn't stop until she reached the base of the mountain trail, the one that led to the ancestral burial ground. The talisman burned in her pocket, hot against her thigh. She didn't remember climbing, only arriving. The graveyard was overgrown. Cracked stones jutted like broken teeth from the earth. Her grandmother's tomb sat near the top, carved in traditional script, but next to it, there was another, smaller, older, the name erased. May knelt. Her hands shook as she cleared away the vines, and beneath them, carved faintly beneath layers of soot and time, she saw it. Pan Xiang. The tomb had been sealed with red wax, melted, hardened, cracked with age, but not broken, not yet. She stayed there for hours, whispering, asking, Pan Xiang, who were you? Were you angry? Were you afraid? Did anyone hold your hand when they chanted over your body? The mountain wind gave no answer. But something did. From behind her, barely heard, the sound of silk dragging across stone. May turned slowly. The forest edge was empty, but the air was heavy. And the 13th stick, she could still smell it, burning, always burning.
The next morning, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps, then silence. May had barely slept. Her hair clung to her face with sweat. Her dreams were no longer dreams, just smoke, mirrors, and a burning that reached her bones. She waited. Another knock, softer this time, hesitant. When she opened the door, it wasn't who she expected. It was Jun. He had been a distant cousin once, or something close enough. The village had always called everyone aunt, uncle, cousin, but May remembered him from the days she used to run through rice fields barefoot and laugh before the altar ever meant anything. He looked older now, thin, sleep-deprived, and afraid. "You need to come with me," he said. "It's Uncle Wei." "Who?" He just shook his head. "You'll understand when you see." Uncle Wei lived in the southmost house, near the dried-up irrigation canal. He'd once been strong, a man with a loud voice and larger hands, a former craftsman who used to carve ancestral plaques. When May entered the house, she could hardly recognize him. He lay curled in the center of the room, sweat soaking through his cotton shirt, eyes wide and glazed with fever. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to form words that had long since fled his tongue. But what struck her, what made her knees weaken, was the mark on his chest, a black circle, burned, exactly like hers, only his was larger and still smoking. Jun pulled her aside. "It appeared last night. He screamed for hours, said her name." May didn't ask who. They both knew. "Pan Yang," she whispered. Jun flinched. "Don't say it aloud." "She's already here. It doesn't matter anymore." Uncle Wei died before sunset. No one rang the morning bell. No white cloth hung outside the door. The villagers said nothing. But by nightfall, 2 more homes shuttered themselves tight, and smoke poured from their chimneys, thick and choking. May wandered through the village in the dark, drawn by instinct more than thought. She walked until she reached the back alley behind the temple, where old offerings were sometimes burned. And there she saw it. A new incense burner, placed freshly in the ground. It held only one stick, blackened, still smoking. The marks were spreading. Over the next 2 days, May heard more coughing, more silence, and more whispers behind doors that slammed shut when she passed. By the 3rd evening, she counted 5 deaths, all from the Yao bloodline, all with the same circular burn directly over the heart. And each time, no funeral, no ritual, no offering, only smoke. She returned to the monk, clutching the old scroll with Panyang's name. He didn't greet her. He was already lighting candles, lining them along the temple floor in a perfect circle. "We don't have much time," he said. "She's claiming the bloodline." "Yes, the 13th cannot be appeased with silence anymore. She demands her place, and one by one she's taking it." May stepped into the circle of light. "Can she be stopped?" The monk didn't answer. Instead, he retrieved a folded cloth from beneath the altar. Inside it was a mirror, handheld, bronze, cracked at the edges. He held it up to her. "Look." She did, and gasped. Her own reflection, twisted, not in shape, but in expression. Her face was neutral, but the reflection was smiling, that same faint, knowing smile. Not her own, never her own. The monk withdrew a brush, dipped it in ink, and began painting symbols onto her forearms. "These are seals of witness. They'll keep her from fully entering for now, but if the mark reaches your throat..." He didn't finish. That night, she dreamed of the wedding again, but this time she wasn't a guest. She was the bride. The room smelled of blood and flowers. The incense smoke was thicker. The red veil clung to her face. She walked through the ceremonial house, barefoot, hands tied with red silk, and every ancestor's photo turned to watch her pass. And at the altar, waiting, not a groom, but a mirror. It showed Panyang, wearing red, smiling and whispering, "Your body remembers what your blood denies." She woke screaming. The mark on her chest was larger, no longer a circle, but a bloom like a flower of ash, and it pulsed. She ran to the family altar room, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The 13th incense was now nearly gone. Barely 2 inches remained. The copper bowl was full, not just with wax, but now with something moving inside it, dark liquid that rippled even without wind. The mirror no longer showed her face, only Panyang's. She wore May's expression like a mask, blinking, breathing, alive. In desperation, she threw open the journal again. There, hidden in the back, scribbled in her grandmother's more frantic handwriting, were notes on an old rite. If the 13th begins to burn on its own, if the veil appears, if the mirror breathes, the rite of Chao Hui must be attempted. Ash must return to ash. The bones must be burned beneath the blood tree. But if the 13th finishes burning before the rite, the spirit cannot be banished, only welcomed. She becomes the blood. May's hands trembled. She flipped to the last line. The 13th is not death. She is inheritance. At midnight, someone knocked again. 3 times. No voice. Just silence. When May opened the door, no one stood outside, but at her feet lay a single bundle of incense sticks, 12 unlit, and 1 already glowing. The 13th. The final ember had come home.
The eyes were everywhere now.
May saw them even when her own were closed. In the shine of kitchen tiles, in the flicker of an unplugged television, in the water basin near the altar, in mirrors, glass, pools of shadow. Always watching, always wide, and never hers. At first, they had only watched, but now they blinked, and sometimes they cried. Not tears, ash. She stopped sleeping. When she did, the dreams turned into something worse, memories she didn't own. She awoke with her hands trembling, her body curled in poses unfamiliar. Once she found herself in front of the altar at dawn, barefoot, veiled, kneeling, incense in hand, unaware of how she'd gotten there. The mark on her chest had grown into a constellation, circles within circles, a symbol older than any language she could name. Even her voice sounded different now, echoed as if something whispered just behind it. On the seventh day, the sun disappeared, not behind clouds, not with rain, but behind a solar eclipse. May had not known it was coming. The villagers had not spoken of it, yet no one was surprised. No one stepped outside. The sky darkened around noon. A crimson haze spilled across the village, and the mountain birds fell silent. Inside the house, the altar glowed with unnatural light. The 13th incense had burned nearly to its base, and the copper bowl was overflowing. She could hear it dripping now, thick and rhythmic, down into the cracks of the wooden floor. She returned to the monk, but the temple was empty. Inside, the candles were all extinguished. The floor had been swept clean. His sandals were still by the door, but of him, no trace. Only a note pinned with a thorn. If she sees through your eyes, do not look back. You are the window now. May ran back to the ancestral house. It was no longer a house. The walls were slick, damp, covered in smeared symbols and thumbprints, fresh ones, still wet. The air pulsed with breath. The altar room door had vanished. In its place stood an archway, carved from blackened wood, adorned with wedding silk, lined with mirrors. The copper bowl floated in the air before it, suspended by nothing. The 13th incense, down to its final inch, burned in complete stillness, untouched by wind, immune to time. May stepped inside. The hallway beyond was not the one she remembered. It was the house of her ancestors, but younger, restored, lit with lanterns and candles, adorned with red calligraphy for a celebration long gone. As she walked, she passed portraits of her lineage, not faded photographs, but living images. Each ancestor blinked as she passed. Some turned their heads. Some followed her silently with their eyes. And when she reached the end, the final portrait was her. But the name beneath it read, Yao Shang, the returned bride. Her breath caught. She touched the frame. Her face in the painting blinked, and then smiled. Suddenly the hallway twisted. Candles blew out one by one. Smoke flooded the space, and through it she heard footsteps, dozens, slow, deliberate, echoing like a processional march. She turned. Figures moved toward her. Ancestors, dressed in ceremonial robes, some with open mouths chanting wordless hymns, some weeping, others headless, limbless, broken. All of them burned. Ash clung to their garments.
Their feet left scorch marks on the floor. And at the end of the procession, veiled in red, came Pan Shang. She did not speak, she only walked. Each step echoed inside May's body. The mark on her chest throbbed in rhythm. Pan Shang's face was no longer hidden. She was beautiful and terrifying. Her skin pale as paper, her lips darkened with ritual ink. Her eyes were identical to May's. Not similar, the same. She stood inches away and gently reached forward. May wanted to run, but her body refused. Her blood obeyed something older. Pan Xiang touched the mark. The pain was immediate and unbearable. A fire that wasn't fire, a scream that never left her throat. And then, "Look," the spirit whispered. In a flash, the walls of the house melted away. She stood in a field of bones, not human. Ashen incense sticks broken and buried like grave markers, and before her, the original altar, cracked, stained, surrounded by ancestral masks and blood-soaked banners, an ancient forgotten altar once used for the first sacrifice. A child knelt there, small, shaking, wrapped in red. Pan Shang, surrounded by family, none of them looking at her. Only the fire, only the incense. The chanting rose. The incense was lit. The smoke wrapped around the child's body, and she screamed. And then, silence. And then, nothing. May collapsed to her knees. Tears poured down her face. This was not a vengeful ghost. This was a wound that had never healed, a spirit twisted by betrayal, forgotten by blood, cursed to wander, half summoned, half buried. Pan Shang knelt beside her, their eyes locked. "Finish the flame, or let me finish you," she whispered. Back in the real world, May awoke on the altar room floor. Smoke filled her lungs. The 13th incense had an ember as big as a dying star, burning holes through the copper bowl. The mirrors cracked, the altar wept, and the mark on her chest had opened, no longer a burn, but a mouth, breathing, waiting. The house did not breathe anymore. It listened. Every floorboard, every wall, every beam of redwood now pulsed with the weight of ancestral memory. As May moved, the silence bent around her, not passive, but aware. She could no longer pretend she was the last Yale. The house knew better. She wasn't alone, and she never had been. She found the final journal hidden in the base of the altar, buried beneath rotting silks and burnt prayer scrolls, sealed in wax that cracked as she pulled it free. This one was older than the others, not her grandmother's. The ink was stiff with age, and the script was harsh, written by someone who had not intended to be understood easily. Ritual language, crossed with village dialect, filled the pages in spirals and grids. But one phrase repeated, over and over. The blood remembers. She flipped to the center, where the handwriting shifted, more rushed, less composed. A confession. "We broke the covenant. When the famine came, we were told to give one of our own. Blood for rice, spirit for water. A Taoist from the southern mountain gave us the right. But we chose the child born on eclipse, the 13th of the line, a girl, Pan Shang. We told her it was a bridal ceremony.
We dressed her in red. We gave her incense. She smiled. And we burned her alive beneath the blood tree. May's hands trembled. The next year, the harvest returned. The river rose. The sickness left, and the family prospered. 12 generations flourished, but we never lit her incense. We sealed her name, removed her from the altar. Her spirit wandered, bitter and half-formed, bound by ritual but denied release. Now, the 13th generation has come, and she returns. The ink at the end was smudged with blood. May sat in the altar room for a long time. The incense had burned down to its last stub. The copper bowl hissed. The mirrors were nearly opaque. Smoke pressed against the glass from within, like hands reaching toward the surface, begging to break through. She whispered the name, Pan Shang, and the smoke stilled. The mirror cleared, and May saw herself, dressed in the red qipao, standing before the altar, as if the reflection had stepped ahead of her. Behind the reflected May stood 12 women, some old, some young, all bearing the same face, her face, the Yale line, and then the 13th. Pan Shang stepped into view. She placed a hand on the reflection's shoulder, and slowly she turned her gaze toward the real May. The mirror cracked. May ran. Through the village, past the shuttered homes and blind windows. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the forest, where the burial mounds and ritual trees grew thick and twisted. She climbed, up the hidden trail the monk once shown her, to the blood tree, the one from her dreams. There it stood, blackened but living, rooted in red earth, a gnarled ancient giant with prayer ribbons long rotted to threads. And at its base, a shallow grave, disturbed, opened, empty. Something inside her snapped, not with fear, but understanding. This wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't vengeance. It was inheritance. Pan Shang had not been cast out. She had been made sacred, then discarded. A sacrifice denied her sanctity. A bride burned before she could become a woman. And May? She was her echo, her vessel, the 13th generation, the blood that remembered. She lit 12 sticks of incense and placed them in a circle around the blood tree. Then she took the final blackened 13th, still glowing faintly, and held it to her chest. She didn't pray. She spoke. I remember you. The wind stopped. The forest listened. I know what they did to you. I know they buried you without a name. I know they ate from the harvest you bled for. And I know they forgot. The final ember flared. I won't forget. She pressed the incense into the soil, and as the last of the ash fell, the tree moaned. Not with wind, but with breath. Smoke poured from its branches, the roots split open, and from the earth rose a form, veiled, trembling, whole. Pan Shang. Her face was maize, but softer, tired, unforgiving. They stared at each other beneath the eclipsed sky. No words passed between them. Only blood, only memory. Then Pan Shang reached out and pressed her palm to May's heart, where the mark had bloomed, and May felt it,
the weight of 13 generations, their whispers, their rituals, their debt, their cowardice, their silence. And then she felt release, like breath after drowning, like a door unlocked in her bones. The mark faded, the smoke stopped, the mirror in her mind shattered, and Pan Xiang smiled, not with malice, but with peace. By the time May returned to the village, the sky had cleared. The sun returned. The scent of incense was gone, and the altar room was empty. The 13th bowl stood untouched. No ember, no wax, only ash. And beneath it, someone had written in black ink, "She is remembered."
The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows a storm, where nothing dares to move in case it wakes something that only pretended to go back to sleep. The altar room still smelled of ash. The 13th incense had burned down to dust. The copper bowl, once bubbling with blood wax, now sat cold and empty. No liquid, no ember, no reflection. But May could feel it. Pan Xiang had not left. She had simply stepped inside. In the days that followed, May felt her body slipping. She walked with her own legs, but they felt distant, borrowed. She looked into mirrors and saw her face, but something shimmered just beneath the skin. A veil, maybe, or a mask worn too long. She still dreamed of the wedding, but now she wasn't an observer. She was the bride, fully. She could feel the weight of the silk dress on her shoulders, the tug of red fabric across her throat, the incense smoke weaving into her hair. She could smell jasmine oil and something darker, something that no bride should ever wear. She stood at the altar in those dreams, alone, but waiting for someone. And when she turned, the groom was faceless, burned away, as if history had erased him. All that remained was the veil and the fire. On the 7th night, the ceremonial dress arrived, folded neatly on the edge of her bed. No footsteps, no open doors, just there, red, clean, untouched by time. The same dress Pan Xiang had worn, the same dress Lian had tried to burn, the same dress May had seen in the mirror. She didn't ask how it got there. She didn't scream. She just stared for hours, until the sun went down and the veil of night replaced the one in her hands. When she put the dress on, it fit perfectly. Not like it was made for her, but like it remembered her body, like silk becoming skin. The fabric clung not to her curves, but to her inheritance. Her heartbeat slowed. Her hands stopped shaking. The longer she wore it, the more her memories softened, like paper left in rain. She forgot her grandmother's voice. She forgot the city she came from. She forgot the shape of her own handwriting. And yet, she remembered how to walk barefoot through the ancestral house without making a sound. She remembered how to pour tea with both hands for the spirit bridegroom. She remembered the exact knot to tie the red veil. She remembered how it felt to burn. The house responded. Walls that had warped with age now straightened. Wood glistened. Silks reappeared, fresh, bright, folded in ceremonial corners. Candles lit themselves, and in the altar room, the mirrors cleared.
12 figures stood behind her reflection now, the generations before her, each draped in mourning white, faces covered. But the 13th, she was missing, until May stepped forward and filled the space. She tried to resist, truly. She smeared dirt across her chest. She tore the red veil. She chanted the old Taoist protections she'd copied from the monks' abandoned texts. But the veil mended. The dirt faded. The protection slipped off like water from lacquered wood. You cannot break what has already completed. She was not being haunted. She was being claimed. On the final night, as the moon disappeared behind heavy clouds, the village lit up. Lanterns, all red, hung from every doorframe, every tree, every abandoned window. No one came out, no one made a sound, but the village dressed for a wedding. May walked through the streets barefoot, the hem of her red gown soaked in dew and silence. Smoke curled around her ankles, not incense now, but memory, the scent of ritual. And as she reached the ceremonial house, the shifang, the fragrant room, the doors opened on their own. The room was exactly as it had been in her visions. 2 cushions before the altar, a teapot never poured, a mirror in the place where a groom should stand, and silence, always silence. She knelt, placed her palms together, closed her eyes, and the veil fell into place. A rush of wind circled the room. Lanterns flickered. The mirror shimmered. And then a breath, warm, close, beside her, not touching her skin, but moving through it, and a whisper, soft, childlike, "Now you understand." The floorboards creaked with weightless steps. The copper bowl reappeared on the altar. Inside it, new incense sticks, 12, and one already lit, the 13th. It did not flicker. It burned straight and proud, and May, or what remained of her, smiled beneath the veil. She didn't remember leaving the room, only waking sometime later in her own bed, the red dress folded again at her side. Her chest was bare. The mark was gone, replaced with a symbol burned not into skin, but into soul. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she wasn't free either. She was filled, whole, joined. Outside, the altar stood untouched, but the family line was no longer cursed. It was completed. 12 remembered, the 13th restored, and in the reflection of the mirror there were no empty spaces left, only ancestors, only eyes, and a bride who had never truly left.
The strange thing was how normal it all began to feel. After everything, the incense, the visions, the marks, the veil, May woke the next morning in a perfectly made bed, in a house that no longer creaked. The floorboards, once swollen and warped, no longer groaned. The windows, once clouded with smoke, now let in soft morning light. There were no footsteps, no whispers, no incense, no flame. And yet, something was burning, not with fire, but with memory. It clung to the walls like scent. It stirred beneath the surface of her skin. Not painful, not terrifying, just there. Like a thought she couldn't quite finish, a song she didn't remember learning, humming at the back of her mind. When she passed mirrors now, she didn't stop, not because she was afraid, but because the woman staring back at her was familiar, and also not her. She moved through the village like she had always lived there. The old woman at the herb stall handed her dried chrysanthemum without a word. The children, once hidden behind shuttered windows, now played in the square, but grew quiet when she passed. No one bowed, but everyone watched. And in their eyes she saw it. Recognition. They knew what she was now, who she carried. She returned to the temple. The monk had never come back, but someone had cleaned the place. New candles lined the altar. Incense ash had been swept neatly into bone-white jars. Red ribbons had been tied to the bells. And hanging at the center, where once there had been only emptiness, was a new scroll. It read, "The 13th has returned. Balance is restored. Let none forget again." She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. She was the scroll now, the message, the witness. Each night, she dreamed in perfect clarity. She saw Pan Shang as a child, walking barefoot through a rain-starved field, her small hands clutching an unlit incense stick. She saw the family kneeling in red. She saw the blood tree dressed in silk. She saw the moment of betrayal, not sudden, not loud, just quiet, ceremonial, complete. And she felt Pan Shang scream not as sound, but as absence, a silentless severing, a soul turned inward, a flame that burned without light for generations. May didn't scream anymore. She didn't cry. There were no more terrors, no sudden hauntings, no apparitions crawling from beneath the altar. What came now was presence, still, constant, rooted. Like the 13th incense itself, it did not flicker, it did not warn, it simply endured. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountain, she opened the old wardrobe. Inside, the red bridal dress still hung, untouched. But beside it now was something new, a mirror, polished, heavy, bronze-edged. She lifted it, looked into it, and for the first time, she did not search for her face. She expected the woman behind the glass to blink first. She didn't. Both stood still. Both breathed. Both smiled. "There is no more veil," she heard, or perhaps simply thought. "Only reflection." She began to write then. Long looping strokes, her grandmother's brush, the old scrolls, fresh rice paper. She wrote not as herself, but as a chronicler, a record keeper. The true story, the real one, not the temple's version, not the whispered cautionary tale, not the rhyme that scared children into obedience. She wrote of the famine, of the ritual, of the binding, of the betrayal. She wrote of the burning that never ended. And when she was done, she placed the scroll at the foot of the altar and lit no incense. The smoke wasn't needed anymore. The truth had already entered the walls. Weeks passed, or maybe days. Time folded strangely now. But one morning, May woke to find a stranger at the door. A young woman, lost, pale, city clothes, eyes wide. She held a red envelope. Her fingers trembled. "My grandmother just passed. I'm supposed to come here, this place, the house." May didn't speak. She only stepped aside and let the girl in. As the door closed behind her, the light dimmed, and for just a moment, just long enough, the girl turned toward the hallway where the altar waited, and the 13th bowl sat empty, waiting. She watched her, not with pity, not with malice, only with memory. She was not Pan Shang,
Not fully. She was May. She was the 13th generation. She was the bride who did not burn. But she was also the guardian now. And the house would never forget again. The girl's name was Lynn. She was 19, fresh from the city, wearing a backpack too clean for village dust. Her voice trembled when she spoke, like she wasn't sure if she was in the right place or the right story. But she was. She had always been. Her grandmother had passed, a Yao by blood. Her letter had arrived by post, same as May's once had. Same red envelope, same vague instruction. Return to the ancestral house. Do not disturb the altar. Lynn did not know what the altar was. Not yet, but she would. May watched her move through the house with wide eyes and cautious steps, just as she once had. Lynn brushed her fingers across the wooden walls, paused at old photos, hesitated near closed doors. She asked questions that May never answered, and the house welcomed her. The floors shifted beneath her feet. The mirrors watched. And deep within the sealed altar room, the dust stirred. By the second night, Lynn had begun to dream. She mentioned it over breakfast, eyes glassy, voice low. I saw a girl. She looked like me. She was wearing red. I think she was waiting for something. May nodded, silent. She held incense, but no one else was in the room. Just shadows. They were bowing. She rubbed her arms. I could smell something, like smoke, but sweeter. That evening, May found her in the altar hallway, standing before the sealed door, not touching it, not opening it, just standing there, listening. She didn't say what she heard, but May didn't need her to. She remembered. The seal was broken by morning. Not forced, not shattered, just undone. The wax was still soft. The string lay curled neatly on the floor. Inside, the 13th bowl, once empty, now held a new stick. It hadn't burned, but the tip was blackened, as if someone had almost lit it. May confronted Lynn, asked her directly, "Did you go inside?" The girl shook her head slowly, but not convincingly. I had a dream. I was holding a candle, but I didn't light anything, I swear. May didn't speak. She only turned away, because dreams lie, but incense never does. That night, the smell returned, thicker than before. Sweet and sharp, like lotus root left too long in fire. It clung to May's skin, lingered on her tongue, soaked her hair. She opened her eyes in the dark and saw Lynn, standing at the foot of her bed, veiled, barefoot, smiling. When she sat up, the girl was gone, but on her bedsheets lay a bundle, 12 incense sticks, wrapped in red string, and beside them, the 13th, already glowing, just faintly, a single ember. May tried to extinguish it, pressed it into water, buried it in rice, wrapped it in ash. Nothing worked. The ember wouldn't die, because it wasn't a flame. It was a memory, and memories don't burn. The village changed again, not overnight, gradually. Doors stayed open too long. Children stopped laughing. The old woman at the herb stall died without warning, her chest marked with a faint circular burn. No one spoke of it, but everyone knew. The curse hadn't ended. It had only paused. May returned to the blood tree. She brought the scrolls, the sealed urns, the ink and the binding thread. She dug deep beneath the roots, found the old bones, found the charred silk, found the remains of Pan Xiang's first grave, and for the first time, she wept. Not for fear, but for failure. She had tried to remember, tried to honor, but remembrance alone cannot break what ritual sealed. The debt was too old, too heavy, and now it sought new blood. When she returned to the house, Lin was gone. Not vanished, just changed. She sat in the altar room, fully dressed in red, the veil drawn over her face, and in her hands, the incense. May stepped forward, but Lin did not turn. Her voice was small. She says, "It's my turn now." She says, "I'm next." But she also says, she's sorry. May knelt, gently removed the veil. Lin looked up at her, tears on her cheeks, not from sadness, but from understanding. She never meant to become a curse. She just wanted to come home. May held her, and for a moment, just one, the house was silent, truly silent, as if the blood had stopped crying, as if the ash had settled, as if the 13th could finally rest. But the incense, it was still burning, without flame.
The red veil stayed folded on Lin's lap. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat in the altar room, incense smoke swirling around her shoulders, gaze fixed on the 13th bowl. The ember inside it pulsed softly, as if breathing. Not fire, not heat, but a heartbeat, one that didn't belong to the living anymore. May watched her from the doorway. She had once stood in that exact spot, and now she understood. The curse had never wanted to kill. It wanted to complete. That afternoon, May searched the old family storage room, a forgotten space behind the kitchen, filled with rice urns, broken lanterns, and rotting scrolls wrapped in silk. She found what she was looking for in a box sealed with blood-red wax, an old brass plate etched with Taoist markings and a single sentence scratched into its back. To bind a spirit is to promise it a return. It wasn't a banishment rite, it was a contract. The 13th stick had never been cursed. It was a summoning, and each generation, by choosing not to light it, had broken their side of the vow. Each generation had defaulted on a spiritual debt. And now, the spirit, Pan Xiang, had stopped waiting. She opened her grandmother's last journal again, skimming pages until she reached the very end. One final entry, half finished. I thought sealing the room would hold her. I was wrong. She is not a ghost. She is family, and family always comes home. By sunset, Lin had dressed herself in the ceremonial gown. She didn't speak as May braided her hair, slow and careful, like threading memory into silence. There was no instruction, no command. It was as if the steps of the ritual had already been written in Lin's bones, passed down, unspoken, waiting to be remembered. May lit 12 incense sticks. One by one she placed them in their bowls, then stood before the 13th, still smoldering, still alive. She turned to Lin. "You don't have to do this," she said, but she already knew it was too late. Lin smiled not with fear, but with peace. "She never meant to hurt us," she said softly. "We made her into something she never wanted to be. Maybe this time we give her what she was promised." Outside, the wind shifted, the trees bowed, the blood tree on the mountain stirred, its roots trembling beneath centuries of silence. The village lanterns lit themselves, every single one, and from the temple the bells began to ring, not by hand, by presence. May opened the altar door fully, and Lin stepped inside. A slow procession. No music, no chant, just the sound of footsteps, past generations echoing with her every step. She knelt before the altar, lifted the 13th incense, and for the first time in over 100 years, she lit it with her own hands. The smoke changed immediately, thicker, deeper, redder. It curled like calligraphy, writing spells into the air. The mirrors all around the altar cleared, no longer showing reflections, but faces, ancestors, watching, weeping, but not in mourning, in release. At the center stood Pan Xiang, wearing the same dress, eyes full of something softer than vengeance. She stepped forward, placed her hands on Lin's shoulders, and whispered something only the girl could hear. Lin's head bowed. Then slowly she stood. Her body began to glow, not bright, but warm, like fire beneath skin, like light under water. And then she vanished. No scream, no gasp, just smoke and silence and the scent of incense. May remained kneeling long after the ember faded. The 13th stick had burned down completely, but this time the copper bowl didn't hiss. No blood, no wax, no echo, just ashes and a single red thread curled at the bottom, untied. Outside, the village breathed again. Birds returned. Laughter echoed faintly in the wind. And for the first time in 3 generations, no one died that night. No marks on their chests, no shadows in the mirror, no missing children. May returned to the blood tree one last time. She buried the ashes beneath it, all 13 sticks, then tied a red ribbon to the lowest branch. She didn't speak, she didn't pray, she only whispered, "You're home now." That night, she dreamed again, but it was different. The house was full, the rooms were warm. The wedding was over, and at the center of the crowd, standing tall, proud, and whole, was Pan Xiang. No veil, no shadow, just a girl, smiling, free.
The village awoke to quiet. Not emptiness, but stillness. The kind that comes after a storm, not with relief, but with reverence. As if something old had finally laid down to sleep, and the world held its breath so it wouldn't wake again. There were no funeral drums, no incense smoke staining the sky, no names scratched into fresh wood. The 13th had burned.
and nothing had died. May walked through the ancestral house barefoot. The red veil was gone, the ceremonial dress folded neatly and sealed inside a lacquered chest, no longer humming with inherited hunger. The altar room was dim, peaceful. The 12 incense bowls sat cold. The 13th was missing. Not stolen, not hidden, just absent. Returned, perhaps, to where it belonged. To ash, to silence, to the part of the bloodline that no longer needed fire to speak. She washed the copper bowl clean, drew fresh water from the well, lit a single candle, and for the first time since her return, she did not seal the door. The altar no longer needed protection or fear. It needed breath, space, witness. The monk never returned. No one replaced him. But sometimes at dawn, May heard the bells chime softly in the temple. No wind, no footsteps, just acknowledgement. Some deaths are not paid in coins or rituals. They are paid in remembering. Weeks passed, then a season. The weather warmed, the garden bloomed. Children laughed again, loudly, without caution. May stood by the old plum tree one afternoon and realized she had not smelled incense in over a month, not once. The air was clean, but not empty. The smoke had gone inward. She carried it now, not as a curse, but as a kind of memory, a presence that watched, not haunted, listened, not demanded. She was no longer the vessel. She was the keeper. And the lineage no longer screamed through her veins. It whispered, gently, like lullabies forgotten too long. One day she found a letter on the doorstep. No sender, only a red wax seal. Inside, a simple message. A girl is coming. Another Yao. She does not know, but she will. Teach her gently. Let her choose to remember. May folded the letter, placed it beside the altar, and began to prepare tea. That evening, as the sun sank low, a girl arrived at the edge of the village, hair tied back, clothes dusty, hands clutching a red envelope. May watched her approach from the garden path as the wind picked up and the plum blossoms danced like ash in the air. The girl stopped at the gate, eyes wide, uncertain. May opened the door before she knocked and smiled, not with joy, but with recognition. May had seen this story before, and now she would help it end differently. The girl sat across from her, took the tea with two hands, scanning the house, curious and cautious. "Are you family?" she asked. May nodded. "Something like that." The girl looked down at the envelope. "They told me to come, said I'd understand once I saw the altar." May sipped her tea. "You will." The girl hesitated. "Is it true what they say, that we're cursed?" May looked out the window, watched the lantern sway gently.
saw no smoke, heard no chanting, only the breath of the world settling back into rhythm. She turned back and answered softly, "Not anymore." That night, as stars blinked over the mountains, May stood in the doorway of the altar room once more. She lit a single stick of incense, not the 13th, just one, for peace, for memory, for silence. The smoke rose straight into the still air, curling like script. She bowed her head and whispered not a prayer, but a thank you. To the spirit that stayed, to the girl who burned, to the blood that remembered, to the silence that remained.
The village did not forget. Not this time. Not after the bloodline was mended. Not after the 13th was finally named. The story of Pang Xiang, once buried beneath red wax and whispers, was spoken aloud now, not as a curse, but as a chapter, a lesson, a wound that had finally scarred over. The altar room remained open. Visitors came, not many, just enough. Family members who had once left, curious cousins from far-off cities, daughters and granddaughters who had never lit incense before, now learning how to hold the stick with two hands, how to bow without shame. They no longer skipped the 13th bowl. Instead, they left it empty, a space of honor, not fear. Because the flame had already burned, and there would be no need to burn again. May aged with the house, not quickly, but quietly. Her hair silvered, her hands weathered, but her gaze remained steady, the gaze of someone who had carried something ancient and let it go with grace. Each morning she swept the altar. Each evening she lit one stick, not for a spirit, not for ritual, but for remembrance. Because some offerings are not made in smoke. They are made in silence, in presence, in choosing not to forget. Years passed. The village changed in small, careful ways. The temple was rebuilt. Younger monks took residence, though none spoke with the authority of the one who had vanished. The blood tree still stood. Its roots never grew wider, but its leaves never withered. Each spring it bloomed red, not like fire, like silk. And then one evening, as twilight painted the sky in slow strokes, a letter arrived. No envelope, no ink, just a folded piece of parchment left on the altar table. May opened it with steady fingers. Inside, only 5 words. "It's time to rest now." She smiled. She had been waiting for that. That night she walked through the house one last time, ran her fingers along the photographs, smoothed the corners of the scrolls, closed the windows gently, like tucking in an old friend. And finally she stepped into the altar room. The 13th bowl sat waiting, empty, clean. She lit 12 sticks, placed them with care, then sat beside them in silence, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze on the final bowl, not with longing, but with peace. She did not light the 13th. She did not need to, because the offering had already been made. When the villagers found her the next morning, she was seated just as she had been, her face calm, her posture unbowed, as if she had simply closed her eyes to listen. And maybe she had, because on the altar table before her sat a single red thread, tied in a perfect knot, and in the 13th bowl,
resting where no flame burned, was a single white plum blossom. They buried her beneath the blood tree. No veil, no chanting, just red lanterns hung in silence, and the wind singing through the branches like breath. On her stone they etched no title, no prayer, just one line: she remembered. Epilogue: The scent of her. Years later, a child wandered into the altar room. A great-granddaughter, perhaps, or someone else entirely. She did not know the stories, only that the room smelled different, older, like smoke that had long since faded but never truly left. She approached the 13th bowl, tilted her head, reached out, and found a sealed jar, dusty, small. She opened it and found a single stick of incense, unburned, wrapped in red thread, waiting. But this time, she placed it back gently and whispered, "Not today," then turned and walked away. The altar room remained silent, but somehow it smiled.